Hello, America. Welcome to Your Leo Nation, where we believe in and support the rule of law. I am the Chief Mark Garrett. Joining us today is one of our favorite guests, one of our most knowledgeable guests, and that is Sam Faddis, retired CIA. Sam, welcome aboard Your Leo Nation.
It's great to be here as always. Been too long, man.
It has been too long, and I appreciate you being available just about every time I reach out to you. There is so much going on. I mean, literally, I was just doing the intro music. I'm still writing notes here because things are evolving at such a rapid rate. And I am talking, of course, about the situation in Southern California right now with the ICE operations and the subsequent peaceful protest that commonly described by so many elected officials happening in Southern California. So actually, when I reached out to you just a few days ago, Sam, we were originally just going to talk about a couple other topics. We still will talk about those. But what's going on in Los Angeles right now and the topics that I wanted to discuss originally, they're all related, ironically. Maybe not ironically. I think obviously they're all related, and we're going to get into that. So I want to dive right into this. And one of the things, talking about the ICE operations in Los Angeles County, Paramount, which is a city just, I don't know, half an hour south of downtown Los Angeles. I'm very familiar with it. One of the things that we heard a lot about from the so-called leaders, and I'm going to keep using that phrase, so-called leaders in Los Angeles County, Southern California, the state of California, Governor Newsom, is that we were not made aware of this operation. Now, by the way, I did a short just yesterday about this, and I called out, Sam, my own previous agency that I love dearly. I'm so grateful for what they've done for me, my wife, and my family. And that's the California Highway Patrol, because they put out a statement really emphasizing how they are not taking part in any of the immigration issues. They're not assisting ICE in any in the immigration issues, blah, 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 blah. A statement that was clearly written, at least authorized by the governor's office. And they said they were not made aware of any of these operations. Well, and so the same story from Karen Bass, the same story from, the chief of police in LA, who I'm friends with. We'll talk about that in a bit, and Newsom, on and on and on. My question is, if you are a federal agency, and specifically ISAM, you're going into California, a self-declared sanctuary state that by all admission has at least 2 million illegal aliens in California. Right. And you say you want nothing to do with the secure border. You want nothing to do with the expulsion of illegal immigrants. You want nothing to do with bringing safety back to this country in regards to federal immigration law. Why in the hell would the federal government tip off the people who are most adverse to bringing safety back to California, who are most adverse to removing illegal aliens, many of whom are the worst of the worst criminal-wise? Do you really think, California, that the federal government is going to advise you of operations so you can tip these people off?
Yeah, there's no way in hell that you would do that, right? You'd have to be out of your frigging mind. These guys, and I'm not talking necessarily, I am not talking, forget about necessarily, about officers, uniformed officers on the line doing their job, okay, who are doing God's work. But as institutions, they're playing for the other side. So there's no way you would tell them. First of all, at a minimum, you're going to be completely ineffectual and waste your time. Potentially, you're going to get people killed, right? Information is going to leak, and you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I get the basic principle as you do. If all things being equal, if I'm operating in an environment and there are other folks on our side out there also operating in that environment, it's good for everybody to know where everybody is and what's going on, so we don't end up in a bad situation. Somebody gets killed by our guys because there's mistaken identity. They don't understand that. But, all things are not equal here, right? The political leadership in Los Angeles at both the city level and the state level are opposed to the federal government and actively opposing them and resisting federal authorities. I mean, I think honestly we're teetering on the edge of insurrection legally in that respect. So no, you would not. There's no way in hell you would tell anybody, or you would
Well,
show up and there'd be nobody there to apprehend. At a minimum, that's what would happen.
Sam, you make the point that there would be no one to apprehend, and this is not just conjecture on your part or my part. And by the way, thank you for specifying. We're not talking about the rank and file men and women out there busting their humps to protect. By the way, protect everybody
Right.
in California, whether they are here legally or illegally. We don't want injury
Right.
or property loss to come to anybody. We're talking about, again, the so-called leadership in California. And so when I call out my own former agency, I'm talking to the same people you are, the people, the decision makers, and not the people who are out there doing what they're sworn to do, and that's protect and serve. But like I said, it's not just conjecture about there wouldn't be anybody left to arrest if ICE had notified the local authorities or state authorities. We actually have proof of this in previous actions taken by ICE, where information has been leaked, and ICE shows up, and what do we have? Crickets. People have fled the scenes where the actions were going to take place, the arrests were going to take place. And listen, President Trump and Kristi Noem and Pam Bondi, they're not stupid people. I think they learn pretty quickly. We're not going to have this happen again, certainly by our own doing. So you're right. In a perfect world, and I agree with you, both of us coming from our respective levels in law enforcement and intelligence communities, whenever you can communicate with people who are going to be your allies, you damn well, out of courtesy and out of coordination, you should communicate as much as you can. But this case, as you said, is a different story. I want to talk about, Sam, I want to talk about this next talking point from not only the people in California, but political pundits, the usual suspects, about how unconstitutional this is that Trump has sent in the National Guard, has mobilized, has federalized the National Guard. And, as of recording right now, this episode, we have at least 700 active Marines who are now in the Los Angeles County area. And again, how inappropriate, how unconstitutional, all you conservatives, what about states' rights and blah, 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 blah. It's so funny. They're the ones now that bring up states' rights, and they don't believe in that as far as I can throw them. But I just want to set the stage here. I'm going to let you take the helm here, Sam, and give me your perspective. But I wonder if anybody who maybe didn't go to public school remembers a little thing called Brown versus the Board of Education, where President Eisenhower actually, by the way, he did not federalize the National Guard in Arkansas. He sent in the 101st Airborne, ladies and gentlemen, because the governor of that state was in defiance of federal law and the Constitution, specifically the 14th Amendment. And that's what the president has the authority to do. The president has the authority and the responsibility to maintain the peace in this country. And if governors don't do it, the president has the authority. I probably said more than I should have because I want to give you the time here to go ahead and expound.
Well, look, you're dead on, man. I mean, there's no question legally about the authority of the president of the United States. He's 100% standing on absolutely solid ground here. And you're right. I think, Brown, the case in Arkansas is a brilliant one because, look, federal troops were sent in, and federal troops walked black students into school. They went into school under armed escort of United States Army troops. Right. By the way, I think we fought a war sometime back in the 1860s over precisely this principle, right? Which is this whole idea that you guys can nullify our laws or just make up your own rules on your own territory and act in defiance of the Constitution. I would have thought we would have settled that in the course of the bloodiest war in American history. Um, so we got authorities on the ground that are actively working in concert with people that are flouting the law. We also, by the way, have groups participating in, not just participating in, but really directing and organizing a lot of these actions on the ground in Los Angeles, who are explicitly members of what's called the Chicano movement. And that's not just, and I'm not using that phrase, generally. This is an actual organized movement whose purpose is, who basically their premise is any part of the United States that ever belonged to Mexico should secede and form its own nation. Okay, I think we call that insurrection, right? This is not about rights. This is not about treating people better. This is not about equality. These guys are explicitly dedicated to the proposition that we're going to carve out a massive piece of the United States. Could there possibly be a clearer example of when the federal government is allowed to step in? This is all grandstanding and nonsense and propaganda from the other side. The president is absolutely standing. His standing is rock solid here legally. He 100% can nationalize the National Guard. He can send in federal troops as he's sending in the Marines now. And if you don't like it, Gavin and company, maybe you ought to actually enforce the law. Maybe you ought to stop acting in defiance of federal law and pretending that you can harbor folks that are here illegally.
Sam, you raised a good point. By the way, our guest is Sam Faddis, retired CIA operations officer. Sam, the point about these really subversive groups, and I think about 2020, the summer of love,
right?
When I was head of the California Highway Patrol in Los Angeles County, one of the 8 field chiefs throughout the state, and I was down there on those skirmish lines, and my wife and I are watching this last couple of days, and we're just sitting here. I'm like just wiping the sweat off my brow. Thank God I'm done with that crap. Right. And it's not because I did not want to and really wasn't driven and enthusiastic about enforcing the law. It was the fact that I had to do it within the confines of the political environment of California. It's a very difficult thing to do if you believe in the Constitution, if you believe in the rule of law, if you believe in a civil society, and you have people around you that are making excuses for behavior that we're looking at right now that Anthony's playing for us here in the background. When your city's going up in flames, and you're saying, look, this is a simple, clear cut, and people are making excuses for it, and it's happening right now again. We're seeing the mantra of mostly peaceful protests. These protests were violent from the start. I kind of got off track there, but the thing I wanted to talk about, you brought up the reality of these subversive groups. Off the top of your head, can you kind of enlighten us about some of the resources, the support that is behind these spontaneous, I put that in quotes, protest and civil disobedience? Again, are you familiar with some of the groups that are behind this, if not by name, at least by action?
Sure. Well, whether we're talking about the groups that are specifically involved in Los Angeles or going back to 2020, all of the groups we've been dealing with, Black Lives Matter, none of these protests, none of these actions, protest is a terrible word. These are not protests. These riots, these armed actions are not spontaneous. They are highly organized. They are well-financed. And there's a whole universe of non-governmental organizations out there that funnel money to these guys. So, and some of these are massive foundations, for instance, and everybody knows the name of, George Soros and his Open Society group. Mm-hmm. But there's a whole bunch of others like the Tides Foundation, like the Ford Foundation.
Yes.
They're just on and on and on that pump massive amounts of money. I mean, at one point, I haven't updated my research on this, but I remember as of 2 years ago, the Ford Foundation had given to Black Lives Matter alone in excess of $80 million. So This is not spontaneous, and it's not just a handful of guys, and it's not just folks kind of making this up. It is very organized. And by this point, we have not just groups like I was referencing before in the Chicano movement, because that's relevant, particularly in Los Angeles, and not just Black Lives Matter, but a massive number of Antifa groups across the country, all of these pro-Palestinian groups that are essentially political arms of Hamas. I mean, we got this whole kind of witches brew universe of really well organized groups. And I tell you, one of the things that really, really concerns me, having worked against this kind of thing overseas, is you have allowed the establishment of this giant sort of multi-headed organism with all the connections and all the money. Okay, the line between what's happening in Los Angeles right now, where the violence, as indefensible as it is, generally consists of burning cars, physical assaults, throwing rocks, this kind of thing. The line between that and the day when these groups are just openly assassinating police officers, using explosive devices, using AKs instead of throwing rocks, that line gets, in my opinion, thinner and thinner and thinner all the time. When you have organizations on this scale that can take a city like Los Angeles and set it on fire, the only thing that, as far as I can tell, that's stopping them from taking that next step to much greater levels of violence is just they haven't politically flipped that switch yet. But you already let those networks grow and build. In other words, the monster is already there. And any day you could turn around and find that what's happening in Los Angeles just got a heck of a lot worse. And it could be happening everywhere.
Well, your point is well taken, and I think that to get in the mind of President Trump, and I don't really have to because he is very explicit about his intentions and his reasoning, and the reason he sent in the federalized National Guard and sent in the Marines is because he said he does not want it to get to the point that you're articulating,
Right.
and this is what we have to do. So, we're talking about the leaders in California and law enforcement and politics. The other day when I commented on this, I'm talking about Gavin Newsom, who has said diverting tens of billions of gallons of water to save a bait fish, instead of filling up reservoirs in Southern California in preparation for the fire that did come. Karen Bass hops on a plane to Africa for a ceremony when she had been told by multiple sources, including her immediate staff, that, boy, this is the highest fire danger we've seen in a long time come up this weekend, ma'am. She's like, a great thing. She leaves.
Right.
These are the people that are at the helm. And one of the persons at the helm right now of LAPD, again, it's a friend of mine, and I've known Jim McDonald, LAPD chief, for many years. He's just one of the best people that I know, really on a personal level. He's a good man. But like I said, when my wife and I are watching this unfold in Los Angeles the last few days, I'm so glad I'm out of that environment, because when your philosophies, when your principles are at direct odds with the people in charge above you, when it comes to what we need to do to stop this and how we need to identify and describe the behavior, aka mostly peaceful protests, as opposed to what you said, riots. Riots is exactly what they are. It's very difficult to do your job. And at some point you have to wonder, do I do my job in defiance of my own beliefs? Do I act in an insubordinate way as an official, or do I resign in protest? And those are your three options, quite frankly. Those are your three options. And so with that said, Anthony, can you cue up this clip of Chief McDonald from LAPD? And everybody, it's about 2 minutes long. There's a reason. I want you to watch all this. And Sam, I'll chime in. I want to get your take on this. Anthony, go ahead and play it.
To to the people who are not happy with the fact that ICE is in the community doing what ICE does, it's. I respect ICE for being a fellow law enforcement agency. They have their mission. They have their what they have to do. We don't engage in that activity, but again, we can't preclude them from doing that. They have every right to do that. I ask people in the community to trust the LAPD, that we're not there for that purpose, and that if they have something they need us to be able to address, we're there for them. As far as the big picture of what can I recommend they do or not do, that's something it's a federal issue, and the federal authorities have the right to be able to do what they're doing. As far as people worried about the violence that we're seeing, this violence that I've seen is disgusting. It's escalated now since the beginning of this incident. What we saw the first night was bad. What we've seen subsequent to that is getting increasingly worse and more violent. Tonight we had individuals out there shooting commercial-grade fireworks at our officers. That can kill you. And we have adapted our tactics to be able to have a chance to be able to take these people into custody and to be able to hold them accountable. We are overwhelmed as far as the number of people out there engaged in this type of activity and the type of things that they're doing. They'll take backpacks, and the backpack will have a cinder block in it. They have a hammer, and they'll break up the cinder block and use that, pass it around to throw at officers, to throw at cars, and throw at other people. We've seen people with hammers, and you've broadcasted, breaking the bollards behind the federal building and taking the rocks, if you will, or pieces of concrete, and throwing them at officers. We've had liquid of who knows what description thrown at officers. There's no limit to what they're doing to our officers. And again, as I mentioned in my statement, I can't thank our folks enough and our partner agencies.
So, and that was about a 25-minute or so press conference that the chief did a few days ago. And I actually picked that part out there because it was the most like Jim McDonnell that I could find in that clip. In other words, he was being as honest, I think, as he felt he could be about ICE and things like this. And again, I'm not speaking to what I think that he believes. I'm speaking to how I've seen him behave as a deputy chief for LAPD, as LA County Sheriff's, and as the chief of the Long Beach Police Department over the years. My belief is that there's still some fudging there, and he has to juxtapose what he really feels. Again, this is my take on it, as opposed to what Mayor Bass is saying about, it's mostly peaceful protests and blah 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 blah, and everything was fine until the National Guard came in. I mean, in other words, you have to pull your brain out to believe some of this kind of stuff. Now, I'm thinking, Sam, that Chief McDonnell is in a position of realizing that the very recent fire chief got fired for speaking her mind completely by Mayor Bass. And so I'm not sure where I'm going with this. In other words, I just want to get your take on really the political aspect of it and kind of the pressure that people are under. I know that Jim McDonnell's a good man, has really very good principles, and kind of a mentor of mine, but I think he's kind of hedging his bet here. Your take?
Yeah, I would come down in exactly the same place. And I don't know the man. I've never met him in my life, never worked with him. But I hear a lot of fudging. I think that's a good term, and a little bit of bobbing and weaving. But I think and I guess philosophically, I would have loved to have seen him take a harder, clearer stand. Particularly on the issue of the National Guard, but harder and clearer in the sense of supporting the introduction of the National Guard. But I think you did a good job of laying out the options, right? The fact is, he's not a private citizen. He's in an official capacity, and there's a chain of command. And so, what are your options? Roll over completely and be a lapdog. Or stand up in an act of defiance and say, I refuse to play, I refuse to participate, I won't countenance this. or become totally insubordinate, in which case you're probably going to get fired.
Mhm.
Okay, maybe that makes it cleaner for you as an individual, right? Now you're out, your hands are clean, I won't be part of this. Okay, great. But you're a leader also, right? And you got a whole bunch of men and women working for you in a very difficult situation. And the day you pack up everything in your desk and walk out the door, maybe morally you're in a great situation, but didn't you just walk away from your guys and gals in the midst of a firestorm and having no idea what the internal politics are in Los Angeles in terms of law enforcement? Who's going to actually sit down behind the desk after you walk out?
That's great.
Like, is it
Great.
going to
It's a
be
great point.
somebody tougher than you or as tough as you? Or is it going to be somebody who's just basically going to roll over totally and never stand up to the mayor and so forth? So you got all that stuff bobbling around in your head. I mean, I think of situations in which we were downrange with the CIA and somebody's pushing policies that I absolutely 100% disagree with, and having to run that calculus through your head. Okay, am I fighting this specific fight? Am I going to push back on headquarters on Washington, D.C.? Am I going to say we lost this one and go with it? Well, at what point am I going to actually tell them, okay, I won't do that. I resign. I'm coming home. And what did I achieve if I do that, right? So I guess that all boils down to it's real easy to be standing on the outside and throwing stones and claiming he had stood up more cleanly on one side or the other. But we both know you got all those other factors rattling around.
Well, I think you summed it very well. It is easy to sit here now, being a couple of retirees, and really, I guess, for a lack of a better phrase, passing judgment. However, when one puts himself in the public realm, then that's what you have to expect, that people are going to critique you. And I wish him the best. I do, because he's a good man. He's a good leader. He's very much well loved by the rank and file. They were so glad to have him back, and I do wish him the best. But I do know that he's in a clamshell right there of political pressure. It's not an easy place for anybody. I want to move on to these two other stories we talked about offline a few days ago, Sam. And the first one, not to sound crass, I'm talking about in a media world point of view reference, that it's old news now. It's old news, but it's absolutely related to what we started with.
Right.
With the topic of ICE in California right now. And that is the story of this Egyptian national, the Boulder, Colorado firebomb terrorist, and how he got here, why he was here, and the vetting process. And I'm sure everybody knows about this. And the reason I say, quote unquote, old news, there are only a few outlets that are really still following up on this. And we know who they are. The people who actually know how serious something like this is. And we see a trend, of course, of this anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli, anti-Israel hatred here in this country. But I want to get your take on this. This is the Mohammed Solomon story in Boulder, Colorado. I guess we're going about, close to 10 days ago now. But
right.
He got here on a B1, B2 visa, and he was supposed to leave in 2023. The Biden administration gave him a work authorization through March of this year. And of course, he was still here now, obviously in custody. But he had overstayed it by a couple of months when he committed this horrible, horrible crime of really setting people on fire who were peacefully demonstrating, truly peaceful demonstrations in Boulder, Colorado. So Can you give us a little background of your knowledge of the visas, if you have it or not? But and really, I set it up, but why this is related to what ICE is doing now, trying to vet and expel people from this country who should be expelled.
Well, one of the things that strikes me, and I end up talking about quite a bit these days, is language is supposed to be for the purpose of communicating and illuminating things, right? We're supposed to use words to do that. The left has long since moved into a world of using language for exactly the opposite purpose. It's to obscure things and honestly, often to lie, to completely misrepresent things. So, Pete, we were talking about protest. Okay, well, when you're rampaging around, looting buildings, throwing chunks of concrete at police officers, setting fire to vehicles, that's not a protest. That's a riot. At a minimum, it's a riot if it's not a terrorist act. So the people that use that terminology use it deliberately, right? They use it to characterize this in a way which is completely dishonest. So where am I going with this? In regard to this Egyptian fellow and so many more, lurking in the background is this idea that we have vetted people. We somehow did some sort of checks on them, and and it's a lie, right? What did you check? There was no vetting. This guy came in from wherever, and you vetted him. Vetted him how? What database do you think has meaningful information on this guy? Who's collecting information on this dude? Did you contact his government? What does his government know about him? You contacted the Egyptian government, which probably never happened. Their response would be, who the hell is this guy? I have no idea. I got no record on this guy. What do you think? I got a file on every one of what's got to be pushing 100 million Egyptians? I don't know. I have a clue. We got all these Syrians running around. Okay, I'm sure many of them are very good people. There hasn't been a functioning Syrian government in at least a decade? So what federal, what agency did you talk to in Syria? I remember being in the Middle East as a chief of station at a location where there was a U.S. military base, and they wanted to hire a bunch of local guys who were actually not citizens of that country, primarily Pakistanis and Afghans, because in big chunks of the Middle East, they're the ones who do the manual labor. They wanted to hire like 400 of these guys to come on the base and basically dig ditches and help them with construction projects. So one of the guys from the base is talking to me in my capacity as chief. He says, I want to give you all these names and have you guys run them through your database and make sure they're good to go. But, bro, if you want to give me 400 names, you're a good guy. I take my job seriously. I'll run them through the database. You want me to tell you what it's going to tell you? His name is Mohammed, and he says he's born in a village nobody ever heard of in the middle of nowhere. And he barely even knows what his date of birth is. He's probably guessing on that. You know what our database is going to tell you? It's going to tell you we never heard of Mohammed from this village. I don't even know if that's his friggin' real name. I don't know anything about him. So we literally have just abandoned control. We did this years ago. Abandoned any meaningful control. We let all these folks in. We have no idea who they are or where they came from. How many Afghans that came into this country after our withdrawal? Again, I'm not branding them all as terrorists. That's not where I'm going. Most of them probably just happy to be out of Afghanistan and have a chance to start a new life. But the point is, we have no clue who they are. How many of them were Taliban or Al Qaeda guys or have those inclinations? So now we're controlling the border, more or less. That's great. How many folks are already inside on our soil? We have not the slightest idea who these guys are. So I guess where I'm going with that is we are lucky so far that it hasn't been one hell of a lot worse. And this guy was pretty crude and pretty simplistic with his stupid Molotov cocktail thing that he came up with. Not that makes it any better for folks that he attacked, but we're talking about individuals from places where when you stage an attack, you detonate an explosive device and it blows 120 people into pieces all over the place. And those are the ones that are dead. I mean, That's the scope of what you could be facing. And we're still not out of the woods on that because we have no idea where they are, who they are.
Our guest is Sam Faddis, retired CIA operations officer. Sam, it's you really kind of have, pardon the pun here, you lit a spark here. When you said that we don't know who these people are. In other words, you were giving the example of you when you were actually in the field and you get a list of these 400 people, vet them. So what does that mean, vet them? In other words, garbage in, garbage out, a computer, so to speak. Are things, in your opinion, are the capabilities of vetting a person from anywhere, any given country, are they any better today than they were 20 years ago? Or is our best option to secure the border and bring the immigration stream down to a trickle? Or is it a combination of both? In other words, do we have the ability on an individual basis to feel reasonably safe that this person is not going to put together homemade Molotov cocktails and burn people walking down the street?
Well, when you said sort of all of the above, I think that's the answer, right? I mean, you can't have open borders and let masses of people in and then think. At some point, it's just like, okay, I don't know what you want me to do with that. I cannot possibly vet all these individuals or collect on these. The barn door is wide open, so we're screwed. So you have to get control over the border, and we have to press ahead with getting folks that are illegally here out, in my opinion. We also have, related to this is the problem that our collection is terrible. Mm-hmm. Our human intelligence collection capabilities are nowhere near sufficient. I mean, CIA and other organizations currently are broken and they are not collecting. I mean, one of the keys to knowing if Al-Qaeda is putting operatives on your soil, just to grab an example out of many, is to have people inside Al-Qaeda that tell you what they're planning and what they're plotting, which was obviously what we did not have on 9/11. We did not have sources at the right level. And we could go on through the universe of terrorist groups, right? Okay, we're not in a better position than we were then. I mean, with what has been done to our human intelligence collection capability, where folks have been more concerned with, what's the color of your frigging skin and what's your sexual orientation and all sorts of stuff that's at best irrelevant, because the only thing we really care about is not who you sleep with or where your family came from, but can you actually do your job? Mm-hmm. That's went by the boards, and our collection abroad is ridiculously limited. I mean, if we're supposed to be moving at 60 miles an hour, we're barely past a walk in the field. The number of sources we're running is ridiculous. I don't want to get into exact numbers. We start stepping into the realm of classified, but not to make, me the be all or end all of anything, but compared to what the standard pace was in CIA when I was operational in the field, you're effectively talking about an organization that's almost shut down. It's barely moving. It's barely crawling. So the chances you're going to get warning, which is critical, that's their whole job, are very, very, very small. And we need to address all of these things have to be fixed, and they all got to be fixed at the same time, and they all got to be fixed really fast.
Pardon the interruption, but again, I'm making notes as you're talking because it's great stuff. That was my next question. Are you confident or only hopeful or just maybe plain curious as to the intention and the ability of this current administration to revamp and revitalize the resources in the CIA and other intelligence agencies to do just what you're saying needs to be done?
Yeah, no, I'm not. Do I think the president wants that? Without question. Do I think that's his intent as commander-in-chief? And is he generally aware of it? And I don't mean generally to sound disparaging. I'm saying the man sleeps The man's working 16 hours a day and covering a lot of territory. So as president, you don't get the option of diving way down in the weeds on any one agency, right? But I know he gets it. I know he needs it fixed. Do I see any indication that CIA is fixing these problems now? Zero. I don't see any indication that that's happened. If it was happening, the first thing that would have happened early in this administration is they would have fired basically everybody on the top floor of the building.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
yeah, and we talked about that. You talked about that probably in a couple of shows that we've done together, and you're absolutely right. Continue.
Well, I mean, look, it's I've never been a police officer, but there are commonalities here between the way, whether you're talking about an intelligence organization, law enforcement organization, military unit, Marine infantry battalion. If things are really in bad shape, and kind of standards have fallen out, and performances, you're failing every inspection, and your performance is nowhere near what it should be. In pretty much every case I'm familiar with, the first thing that's going to happen is current leadership is going to be removed. The first thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a really clear signal that there's a new sheriff in town, if you will, and somebody else is in charge. A standard military approach. Commanding officer, his executive officer, the sergeant major are all looking for work elsewhere. And there are really loud, clear signals that say, I don't know what the hell's been going on here up until now, but we're changing. We're, those kinds of things where you get somebody's attention. It's the reason drill sergeants walk into barracks at the beginning of basic and throw trash cans the length of the room and start tipping things over and yelling in loud voices. It's like, sort of, do I have your attention now? Are you paying attention to me? Whatever's been going on here, it's not going on any longer. We have not seen anything like that. And obviously, this failure of the intelligence community applies on a variety of fronts, right? Every day I read something from somebody telling me how far the Iranians are from having a nuclear weapon. And having worked that target a lot, my first question is, how do you know? Mm-hmm. What the Iranians didn't tell you.
Right.
You really have the intelligence to make that judgment? I don't think so. I think you're just making stuff up.
Well, Sam, I it's so funny. I wonder that all the time. Now, listen, I'm dead set in the position, the belief, the mindset that they are pursuing a nuclear weapon as quickly as they possibly can. But the time frame it's really unknown for the reasons you articulated. The intelligence is probably not as robust as either of us would like it to be, which again indicates, maybe lacking intelligence in other ways. Going back in other arenas, going back to what's going to fix this problem with undesirables, coming into the country. And when I say that, I'm talking about people who are a threat to our safety and our sovereignty. When I say undesirables, that's exactly what I mean. Isn't it funny, Sam, that we have to sit here and explain to people the obvious? We're not talking about these immutable characteristics. We're not talking about whatever. No one cares about that if you're in your right mind. We're talking about people who are going to make you and your sister and your next door neighbor and your grandma less safe when I say undesirable. So let's make that clear for everybody who may not understand the niceties and subtleties of what we're talking about. But one of the tools we're talking about, closing the border, better intelligence, and things like that. So one of the tools that the president has at his disposal and has utilized recently is travel ban for certain countries. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So talking about intelligence, in other words, when the president has to decide, okay, we're going to go and institute a travel ban with country X, Y, Z, ABC, 1, 2, 3, that obviously has to be, I would imagine that's going to be based on a number of things, but we'll pick out two just for giggles. I almost said the S word in giggles. I'll try to keep it clean. but it has to be based on prior behavior, I would imagine, of these countries slash regimes, groups within the country, and then I would imagine also current intelligence.
Mhm.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, sure.
And do you think that, in other words, this is, to me, this is you talk about, say from my point of view, a perimeter or military, point of view that you're very familiar with, talking about inner perimeters and outer perimeters.
Mhm.
You have the inner perimeter, so to speak, which is the physical borders of our country,
Right.
and then outer perimeters is to stop that assault to begin with, and saying, hey, you cannot come here unless I
Right.
specifically say, yeah, that person come, that person, but we're going to institute a travel ban. So is that what you would consider an outer perimeter? And is any of that based on maybe some reasonable intelligence right now in these respective countries?
Yeah, sure. And it doesn't have to be intelligence that actually goes to any specific individual, right? I mean, okay, there's a number of African countries that were on this list, the most recent list. Okay. Primarily sub-Saharan African countries. Okay. One of the things doesn't get a lot of attention in the popular press that everybody understands who works terrorism is that the the expansion of Islamic extremist groups, Islamic terrorist groups throughout sub-Saharan Africa, where there are large Muslim populations, is explosive. I mean, you've got all kinds of groups that have basically found areas where the government is very weak. There are permissive environments. You can basically seize control of areas, operate with impunity, right? These are these kinds of zones around the world where there is no strong central government that's got control. And so all kinds of stuff grows in that territory. Okay. So we know in these countries that are on this list that we have very large, very powerful, very organized Islamic terrorist groups. We also know, at least on a macro level, even if we don't have the details of specific plots, that these folks intend attacks on Western targets. They want to bring the war here. And simultaneously, you have a really weak central government with no record keeping worthy of the name that actually doesn't even have control over big swaths of its own territory. So there's 40% of the country that the federal government, in the sense of the African country's government, does not control. The cops don't go there. The army doesn't go there. The rebels, the Islamic terrorists, own it. Now, in that kind of environment, and by the way, typically you can buy passports by going down to the market for almost nothing, which honestly I have done many times in my career in order to hand them to assets.
Mhm.
Just easier than getting a set of docs from headquarters. We don't need to go through that. Here's $500. Go down to the souk and buy yourself a new name because we need to run you into Iran. This is the kind of environment you're talking about.
Mhm.
So in that kind of situation, what is the point to you contacting the central government of that country and saying this guy Mohammed wants to enter? What background checks? In fact, what you're going to get from anybody, what you're probably going to get is a response from the guys in the federal government in that country. They're going to look at you like, you're not very bright, are you? Like, what do you know nothing about what's going on here? This dude was born and raised in a part of the country where we haven't had a police officer in 30 years. And you can buy passports for nothing in the market. And you want me to run his name through my computer, as you said, garbage in, garbage out, or frankly, no data in, right? Yeah, you want me to do that? That makes you feel better, American? Cool. You know what you now know? You know absolutely nothing about who this guy is, and you have no mechanism for confirming it. This is not Germany. You're not running records with the federal cops in Germany where they got everything by the numbers. So what the president, in my mind, is doing is recognizing reality. One of the nations on that list is Yemen.
Yeah.
Where the Houthis own about half the friggin' country and have been in a shooting war with the U.S. Navy for quite some time now. Well, you're going to go ask the Yemenis about some guy from the Houthi-controlled territory? Again, they're going to look at you like, wow, they did not send the bright children to talk to us, did they? I don't know anything. You don't know anything. I don't know anything. Flip a coin. That's what it's in my mind, and the president's just recognizing reality. He's saying, look, the reality on the ground is such that our alleged background checks are meaningless. We don't have any clue who these guys are. So,
Sam, the word reality, I think is so important because this is what we are experiencing with this current administration. We didn't experience it with the previous administration.
right.
I know there are those listening who disagree with that statement and say just the opposite is true. Well, that's why we have voting every 4 years. If you think that reality is what we experienced the previous administration, then I don't know. There's no jumping off point here to have a discussion. When we let 10, 15, 20 million people come to this country in 4 years, we really don't know what the numbers are, but we know that's in the at least 10 of millions, if not more. The travel ban, as you said, I think it's, in other words, it's common sense, it's logical, and it's part of it. And again, to keep our country secure, to stop the bleeding, sit back, and now we can kind of play catcher a little bit with how we want to do it. So the final thing in relation to all of this, going back to LA and the Boulder attack and so forth and so on, is a slightly more recent story, and that is of these Chinese students in Michigan,
Yeah.
that were arrested for smuggling in agricultural material that it's a pathogen.
Yep.
It's designed to, it's engineered to destroy crops.
Mm-hmm.
Again, all related to the vetting process, to the visa process, to the background checks, again, that you so clearly laid out that is pretty much it's a sieve. It's not effective anymore, at least to this point. One of the reasons I find it so important is because, look, it's the old saying, I'm paraphrasing, look, you're not going to defeat the United States militarily, at least as we sit today. You have to use asymmetrical means, whatever off the beaten path warfare you can come up with. By the way, is the way to go to beat us over the long haul. So, by the way, Sam, I said this about fentanyl for years. I still do, because the Chinese were behind this, all the precursors. Look, Mexico was just one giant mule for it. That's all Mexico was. But it's all Chinese, the originator of this. I still believe that was for the long term, to kill as many young Americans as possible. Because if you kill 14-year-olds today, you don't have 30-year-old colonels in the Marines tomorrow. I believe this. Look, the Germans did it in World War II. They designed mines that blew off the testicles of U.S. GIs. One, it made a casualty that 2 GIs had to carry back to the field hospital. And number 2, they couldn't reproduce if they survived and got back to the United States. That was their intention, stated intention. So this biological warfare, in your mind, how big is this? In other words, these are 2 people, by the way. There was a third one, a PhD student. By the way, from where? Wuhan.
Yeah, from Wuhan.
Maybe Fauci can get us his phone number. We can talk to him. How big is this potentially? I know we don't know, but this is the mindset of our adversary, China. How big do you think this is? What are the repercussions, and what are we going to find out from arresting these people?
Well, I think it's huge. Look, we know that the Chinese, first of all, the Chinese have, as part of their doctrine, I'm talking Chinese military, all of the rules of war, law of war, so forth, Western concepts, Geneva Convention, and so forth, they disregard them. Their explicit statement is, that's a bunch of rules made by a bunch of white guys because they have superior technology to us. So they're telling us we have to fight in a certain way, which is the way they know they are better at than we are. So it is explicit doctrine, Chinese, to reject that. The law of war is irrelevant to them for that purpose. It's something you imperialists came up with to keep us down and make sure we lose. Second, we know as a matter of doctrine, I'm talking about senior guys talking about this, that the concept of biotechnology and using biological agents in warfare is another thing that they explicitly support and adopt. And then they obviously are not going to talk in details about what they're doing. But at the most senior levels, they have talked about biological agents. In fact, even biological agents specifically designed to only kill certain ethnic groups. So presumably a biological agent that would not kill people from East Asia. Okay, so we know that. We also know that if you're a Chinese student here, researcher, whatever, there is no such thing as you being able to refuse the Chinese government telling you they want you to work for you. This is the ultimate Don Corleone offer you can't refuse thing. It doesn't matter if you are pro-democracy, hate the Communist Party, anything else. If you're a Chinese citizen, unless you're suicidal, and as a baseline, never intend to go back to China and don't care what happens to all your relatives in China, you will do what Chinese intelligence tells you to do. Not because you're a bad person or you love communism or anything else, because you got a gun to your head, sometimes not metaphorically. So with all these kinds of things going on, allowing Chinese graduate students to come in and work on sensitive topics like, this gain of function kind of bioengineering research on biological agents, just baseline, that's madness, right? Every one of these people has to cooperate with the Chinese government. Again, not because they're bad or because Chinese people are bad, because literally they are subject to pressure that they cannot possibly resist. I mean, the Chinese literally will get you into the consulate or whatever and put you on a video feed to grandma with the security officials sitting in the background in the room. I'm not making that up. That is real. That happens all the time. So you're not walking out of that room and saying, I refuse to cooperate with you. You may drag your feet a little bit. You may hope that they overlook you. You may pray that you're not in a field that they care about. But if they do care and they put that pressure on you, you're going to roll and you're going to do what they want you to do. So I guess where I'm going with that is this is about a lot more than just 3 folks so far that have been caught. It's about us having to address fundamentally the baseline here. If you're going to let all these Chinese students come in and work in bioengineering and all the other fields and have access to all this information, you're done. I mean, so what do I think we ought to do in Michigan? First of all, I think we ought to seal the lab, the whole lab, which, by the way, is run by 2 Chinese nationals. The people that run the lab where these students are working are themselves Chinese citizens. So we ought to seal the lab. We ought to figure out how many more people have been doing this, figure out what else is going on in there. And then we ought to start throwing people out of the country. And then we ought to go to every university in the United States and do the exact same thing. Because you caught 3 guys, or 2 of them are ladies, I believe, 3 individuals in the course of 10 days, a week? Well, how many? It could be hundreds of them across the United States. This could very much be the tip of the iceberg. But the biggest thing, I think, is you need a complete sea change. You can't conduct this as an investigation of just individual cases, right? You can't do that. You gotta change the whole game.
Well, Sam, on that, that's on most things you and I are in total agreement. They're not here by chance. They're not here as individuals. You laid it out so well about the pressure that they're under. It sounds like a slightly watered down version of North Korea when it comes to holding family members hostage, and do as you're told, or you know what's going to happen, and it'll happen in a slow and painful and brutal way if you don't do as you're told. It's frightening stuff. It really is frightening stuff. And I pray that this administration, I believe they are doing everything that they can within their authority and their power and with the resource they have to confront this. But the first thing, and you said it earlier in the show, is really just to acknowledge this. I can't remember the word you used, but it's reality. The word is reality. And using logic here and calling it out as we all see it. So with that said, Sam, I can't thank you enough for being on. It's been another fantastic show. Ladies and gentlemen, Sam Faddis, retired CIA operations officer, a great guest of the show, a great friend of the show. Sam Faddis, God bless you. Thank you for being on, and I look forward to the next time. And there's so much going on. I may call you sooner than later this time. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you subscribe to Your Leo Nation, share it, watch it. It helps us to be able to speak with people like Sam Faddis. I learn. I know you do as well. We'll see you next time here on Your Leo Nation. Stay safe and make sure you're the first person to obey the law. That'll help all of us to remain safe. Take care.